Welcome to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and their journey. Now, let's get started with the show.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Noah Rosenfarb. You can check him out at wealthrive.com. And Noah, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. Since this is, part of kind of like the EO series, I had Rick Rapé on. I was in EO Seattle. We talked about direct mail. I love direct response marketing and direct mail. We geeked out on direct mail, why it still works, how to do it right. Another one, Eric Evans of EO Austin. He talked about transforming lead generation and customer engagement through AI. That was really interesting. And Roger Einstos of EO Argentina. And he helps people hire software engineers all over the world. So we talked about that and what he does with that. So, and with the advent of AI and other things, he's become popular among companies. So check those episodes out. You could check them out on InspiredInsider.com. And we have a special podcast, Rising Entrepreneurs, that is really featuring different EO members. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. We do that in two ways. One, we're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, accountability, and the full execution and production. Number two, we're also an easy button for a company's gifting. So we make gifting and staying top of mind for your clients, partners, and prospects easy, simple, and also affordable. So some people even send to their staff from a culture perspective. So all you do is give us the list of people. We do everything else. We call ourselves kind of the magic elves that run in the background to make it stress-free for companies so they can build better relationships and, most importantly, run their business, right? So for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways on how I can give to my best relationships. And personally, I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people I admire and share with the world what they're working on the podcast, and also sending them sweet treats in the mail. So go to rise25.com if you have questions, or support@rise25.com and email us. I am excited to introduce today's guest, Noah Rosenfarb. He's the founder of Wealthrive, where he helps entrepreneurs generate predictable income, reduce taxes, build their legacy, and create their ideal life. He's done many talks on this. I've watched many videos, Noah, on this, and really walking through that ideal life it kind of starts with that. We'll dig into kind of the Lotto Ticket Method. I don't know, that should be a book that the sixth book you come out with is the Lotto Ticket Method, because I love your philosophy, you and your wife's philosophy around that. But he's a seasoned investor and exit strategist. He sold 8 companies for a combined total exceeding $750 million, taken one public, completed over 50 real estate investments, valued at nearly $1 billion. As I mentioned, he authored 5 books, and the latest one, if you haven't checked it out, Exit Rich Beyond Money. So, Noah, thanks for joining me.
With pleasure. Glad to be here.
And we'll start, and I want to make a big thank you to two people, John Corcoran, my business partner, who's like, you have to have Noah on the podcast. Also, Kevin Thompson, who's also, I think I was hit at all angles. So like, you have to have Noah. D. Clevitt also mentioned Noah as well. So there's like 3 people in my universe that I trust, and Noah's the man. So Noah, let's start off with the topic of your next book, which is the Lotto Method. Now that we came up with that and just talk about that concept and what you do around that.
Sure, and I'll tell a little bit of an origin story around it because this actually is what led to the founding of Wealthrive. So in 2017, I participated at EO Nerve in a short talk speaking competition, which I won. And my presentation was on how I won the lottery. And what my short talk essentially revolved around the stories that my wife and I have utilized this tool and strategy where we go and buy a lottery ticket and we answer 4 different questions. If assuming we won, who would we spend more time with? Who would we spend less time with? And what are the things we'd start doing? And what are the things we'd stop doing? And throughout my life, when I bought these tickets and thought about winning, I've noticed that there were different things that I'd like to accomplish. And yet, when I reflected on what was really holding me back, I realized I didn't need to win the lottery. I needed to be more thoughtful. I needed to be more courageous. And I needed to be truer to myself and to what I really wanted out of my own life. And it's led me to make uncomfortable decisions, impactful decisions, and really put me in a position where I feel really proud of the life that I've created.
Talk about maybe some of those uncomfortable, decisions. You mentioned that was kind of the impetus of Wealth Thrive.
Yeah, and so to tie one to the other, maybe they're somewhat non sequiturs. I'll tell you first about how it led to Wealth Thrive, which is I started speaking after I had sold my last operating business. So I had a family office for divorced women. That was an evolution of growing up in the forensic accounting business with my dad and helping him scale and sell his CPA firm. But I testified in divorce court that led me to founding this family office for divorced women, which I sold in 2014. And essentially was, I don't know a better word than retired, but I was a full-time investor in businesses and real estate. And I didn't have a job to show up to. And so one of the things that I thought would bring me meaning and purpose in my life would be sharing my experience. And so I did that EO talk. I won that speaking competition that led to more talks. Eventually, I started talking about taxes because, lo and behold, nobody in EO was talking about taxes in a way that was intriguing and creating value. And after I started giving those talks, people were asking me for help. And I didn't want a job. And so I wasn't sure how to help them. But eventually, I heeded their call. And I built a team of accountants, lawyers, and financial planners that can implement the Rich Beyond Money framework that I've created on behalf of these entrepreneurs. And so it was really one thing leading to another that kind of evolved into what is now Wealthrive.
Yeah. And I get that. It's like, listen, I have passive investments. Do I really want to create another company and build a team around it and stress and everything that comes with that? So I've definitely avoided things like that in the past, and it just takes enough people to just demand and ask. How often do you and your wife tend to do this exercise and buy the lotto ticket?
More recently, it hasn't come up that much because I feel like we're so in the zone where we want to be. And part of that, I think the constraints that we have now and really the constraints that we felt for the last number of years have been around our school age children. So the things that we would want to do, they're not money related. They're really more the freedom and flexibility. And so thankfully, my son is graduating from high school. He's off to Florida State University. And my daughter, who will be a freshman in high school, has agreed to travel around the world with my wife and me and be homeschooled. And that, is more aligned, I would say, with one of those things that my wife and I would really like to enjoy. Our son was adamant that would not be fun for him. And as, I would say kind, loving, and generous parents, we've often put our kids' needs and desires ahead of our own. And so thankfully, with our daughter's adventurous spirit, we'll be able to move one step closer towards life my wife and I eventually want to live as empty nesters. We have a plan to be intentionally homeless. And our goal is to live around the world and, kind of blend work and pleasure and in different time and space.
I want to talk, and I want to go back to the homeschooling thing and traveling around the world, because that's really interesting. I think if I pitched that to my two daughters, they would reject it, but that's, it just depends on the personality. But I do want to hear how you're going to plan that out, because it's interesting. It's just a different mindset around education, which I love. But talk about some of the decisions you made differently because of the lotto. I know one of them was moving to somewhere warm, like Florida. Talk about, like, throughout the years, what are some of the decisions you made with this lotto ticket exercise?
So I would say it's really helped in a variety of phases in our life. So that first one that you referenced, we had a 9-month-old son. We were walking on the Broadwalk in Hollywood, Florida, where my grandfather lived, and my in-laws had a place on the beach. And my wife and I were spending 3 weeks over the holidays with our newborn. And, I had already left my job and I was independent working on my family office, but working remotely back then. And we bought a lottery ticket. And one of the things we're saying is like, well, I think we live here. We'd want to escape the winter and live in the sunshine, and we could spend our summers anywhere, and what's the trade-off? And lo and behold, again, that really it was a money decision in many ways, because I gave up a lot of earning potential that I had in the market that I grew up in, where my relationships were deep, where my father was known in the community, and left that all for South Florida, where we knew nobody. And so there was a financial element, but the reality was that the life that my wife and I wanted to enjoy would not be impacted by that move. And so, again, it was more the courage to make the uncomfortable decision to leave my family, leave my wife's family back in the home state where we were born and raised and went to college and had our jobs and had our friends and had our social network. But certainly not a decision that I regret in any shape or form.
Listen, I'm with you. When COVID hit, we worked remotely from Arizona, from Chicago, and I was like, wait, why do we live in Chicago? This makes no sense. So it's definitely in the plan to get out of the winter and not suffer every winter. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of decisions. I love that. Maybe we have a subtitle of your book, The Lotto Method: How I Won the Lottery and How You Can Too, or something like that. Because anyone could do this exercise. And I remember, I was at someone who's, really, I guess, well-to-do family. I was having breakfast there, and I was asking, "Oh, what do you normally have for breakfast?" And they were saying, I don't know why it seemed extravagant to me, but like would have like 2 avocados for breakfast. At the time, I was like, that seems like a lot. I'm like, oh, if I was wealthy like them someday, I'm like, wait, I don't need to. I could have an avocado or two a day if I wanted to. So, but it's that same mentality. So, thanks for sharing that. The homeschool piece.
Yeah.
Talk about the thought process behind, traveling around the world. How are you going to manage it with the education side from kids? I know a lot of people who have young kids, and that seems like an interesting concept, but it seems far-fetched. Like, how would I even do this? How would I handle it? So I'd love to see how you're approaching it.
I think COVID gave us a bit of an insight into what remote schooling would look like. And here in Florida, we have what's called the Florida Virtual Learning School, FLVS. And that program's been around. And I don't know if it's one of the leading programs in the country, but it certainly is well developed here in Florida. So students that want to learn remotely have been able to do that pre-pandemic. And our goal for our daughter is to utilize and leverage that existing infrastructure so we can travel, but there's basically a fully developed online school for her to attend. And my wife's an educator. She, when we graduated college, kind of going back to living our true purpose, her parents made her major in business, and she worked for a Big Four accounting firm, but she really wanted to be a school teacher. And so, when we got married, she went and became a school teacher, got her master's degree, but retired and when we had our first child. And so I think her being an educator, it gives us a little bit of comfort. Our daughter being a good independent student and someone that did well during that COVID era. And then also, I think for us, my view of education is more related to experience. And I think the experiences that she'll have visiting different locations and geographies and people and, interesting places to see and conversations to have, that education can be much more valuable in the long run than any formal education. And along with her personality, she's a very outgoing person, and she's not as necessarily like book studious as my son is, who could sit at a desk for hours at a time and study. And so I think to enhance her skills and capabilities, I think this trip will do a lot more than sitting in her local high school for the first year. And the downside, of course, is she'll give up access to her friends every day. And, that's her biggest concern, is that trade-off. She's incredibly social and has a great friend group. But, we've kind of encouraged her in large part through the conversations we've had with adults, because the adults all say the same thing, will you take me with you? That's such a great idea. Oh, your daughter's so lucky. And so when we share that feedback with her, we say, listen, their perspective is they understand what it's like to give up hanging out with their friends on the weekends, their freshman year of high school. And in large part, those things blend in with your, childhood. They don't really stand out, whereas all these experiences are going to really stand out and stay with you for your life.
What are some must destinations on this around the world journey for you?
So we've actually got the first half planned. We're going to spend 80 days in Europe in the fall. So we'll be in the UK, France, Italy, Germany, and Switzerland. And then in the spring, we're going to spend 100 days in Asia, part of which is stopping at my office in Cebu in the Philippines to meet my team, some of whom I've been working with for 12 years, 13 years, and never met in person. So that'll be a nice homecoming in a way, as well as hitting my wife and my daughter have never been to Asia. I haven't been since 1996, so it'll be a great way for us to explore. I'll hit my sixth continent in Australia and New Zealand. I've never been down that far, so we'll be 30, 40 days down there. And head over to, we're still working on the other stops in between, but we got Dubai, Singapore, Cebu, as I mentioned, Australia, New Zealand, and probably Tokyo and Honolulu on the way
Your
back.
next EO talk will be that traveling around the world and with a child, and that I'm sure people will be interested in that talk
Yeah.
next. I know one of the most popular things about your talks is taxes, shockingly. Okay, but it's the creativity around taxes. So I'd love to hear some fun stories around the creativity around taxes. I know there's one story about you know, wrapping a 401k, but I mean, I'm not going to steal your thunder with it, but
I'm happy to share that one.
maybe start with that one.
Yeah. Well, I
And we'll
think
talk about some creativity that you've seen or done. It could be you've done them or you've seen it around
yeah.
the creativity.
I'll zoom out to start with why is taxes interesting when I'm speaking, because it's such a dry topic. And I'm a third generation CPA. I'm someone that's taken advantage of the tax code for my own family situation. And when I speak, I share the structures that I've used to help my family pay very little in tax and why it's so important. But really, my message to entrepreneurs is that it's our responsibility to determine our tax strategy. And we can't abdicate this responsibility to our tax preparer because our tax preparer's job is generally not to develop your tax strategy. And unfortunately, so many entrepreneurs just don't even recognize that that's a problem, that there's this gap between their tax preparer and maybe their investment advisor, which is what is the tax strategy that you're going to utilize to pay as little as possible in taxes over time. So when it comes to that discussion, one of the things I think people don't understand is what's possible and what happens if you're wrong. And really, it's the fear that people have of audits that prevents them from often even engaging in a conversation around what might be possible for them.
Yeah, and I want to point out, like you do talk about this, about, the saving in taxes allows people to reinvest in their business, grow their business, create more jobs. It's not just about buying like a nice car, right? And I know that you talk about, do you want the hands in the entrepreneur individual or do you want the hands in the government? Who's going to further that money and make more of a difference in the world?
And I believe, I've always believed that entrepreneurs are heroes. And that was from a young age, partly, I guess, because I grew up with a dad who was an accountant. And so he instilled in us the value of entrepreneurs and how entrepreneurs are the ones that, are creating jobs and innovating and creating value. And so my goal was always to find ways to support those entrepreneurs because I thought, yes, it's great for the first responders, the men in blue and red that come and save us when there's problems. But really, the way the earth moves is through the ingenuity and creativity of us as entrepreneurs. And what I've recognized kind of, again, through the evolution of business and really having the time and space to do whatever I want, kind of post-retirement lifestyle, I found that the way that I could leverage my talent, my experience, my skills, and support the vision that I have and the people that I want is through this application of creative tax strategy. And it's been really rewarding.
So let's talk about some of them. I mean, people, maybe start with the Puerto Rico one. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's always an interesting one. And also, I just want to point out if you are in the video part, there's a wealththrive.com or here. If you scroll around, poke around, there is a download our 23 overlooked tax strategies, so you can actually go to their site and actually get. We'll talk about a few here. We're not going to be able to go through obviously all 23, but I encourage you to fill out the form and they actually have a download here where you can get them. So.
Yeah, and that list, just so your audience knows, that list is you print it out and you go over it with your existing tax preparer. This is the low-hanging fruit that you may just not have ever had a conversation about.
Yep, love it.
And then what we tend to do, so those I would like to reference as like tier one strategies. Those are all the things that your accountant actually knows about. They just may not have told you that it might apply to you. And so, yes, I love accountants. I think they do an important job. They are the most trusted profession for a reason. The average relationship with your tax preparer is 19 years. So, there's a lot of relationship value that's built with your accountant, but they may miss some things. And so these tier one strategies are just a way to bring up some ideas with them that they will be familiar with. They may just not have recommended them.
Yep.
The second area of planning is what I would call tier two strategies. And these are ideas that if you search in Google, you may find some information about them. Whereas the tier three strategies, they're not even on Google. They're the things that we're creating behind closed doors, and we're innovating and inventing new tax structures. And so those, sometimes we share the outcomes of what they are, but not necessarily the ingredients to the recipe. And on the tier two side, one of the stories, as you referenced, is I own a business in Puerto Rico inside of a Roth 401k plan. So there's a couple of interesting parts to that story. One is, why would I own a business in Puerto Rico? And that's because the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. territory, only charges a 4% corporate tax rate. So unlike I live in Florida, I have a C corporation in Florida as well that pays 21% to the federal government. It pays 5% to the state of Florida. But my Puerto Rico C corporation only pays 4%. Wow, that's pretty cool. The second piece to it is that it's owned by my retirement plan, my Roth 401k. Well, that's interesting because when I issue a dividend from my C corporation, so C corporations, unlike what most people have, is a S corporation, and that taxation is coming through to them personally. So a C corporation pays its own tax and then issues a dividend to its shareholders. Well, when you own stock in your 401k and you receive a dividend, you don't have to pay any tax. So whether that stock is the company that you founded or it's Procter and Gamble or Berkshire Hathaway or whatever company you own that might issue a dividend, you would pay no tax. And the really cool thing for me is, as my company makes profits and I pay 4% to Puerto Rico, they issue a dividend and pay no tax on it. Now I take that capital and it's in this tax-free container where I predominantly invest for yield. So I invest in debt and generate, let's say 1 to 2% per month in interest. And all of that interest is tax-free because it's in my 401k plan. And eventually, when I take that money out, it'll be tax-free because it's a Roth 401k plan. And so there was a creative structuring. I was the first person in the world to create this structure. It's a combination of Puerto Rico's then Act 20, now Act 60, with something called the ROBS plan, ROBS, which stands for Rollover Business Startup, along with a Roth conversion. So it was kind of aligning up these different areas of the tax code, weaving them together in a way that satisfied my personal needs to create an incredibly efficient tax structure.
Thanks for sharing that. No, it is fascinating stuff. So that's to be kind of in the tier two category.
Yeah, because again, I've published information about that. I invented that with another tax strategist who had been working out of the U.S. Virgin Islands. He had moved over to Puerto Rico. It took us 2 years to come up with this structure. And then we've since promoted the structure publicly, and he implements that as a standalone without necessarily people needing to work with my company. If somebody knows precisely that that's the structure and strategy they want to use, they could go right to him.
Nice. So I'd love to hear an example in the tier 1 and 3 category. Obviously, the report is kind of tier 1. What would be an example in the tier 1?
Yeah, it could be as simple as using the right retirement plan. So I mentioned I have this quite sophisticated retirement plan structure that owns a business that I control. That's unusual. But for a lot of entrepreneurs, it may be setting up an IRA or a Roth IRA, maybe a SEP retirement account. It may be a 401k. It may be a defined benefit plan. There's all these different types of retirement plan options that provide different types of tax benefits. And so what you want to make sure is you're just evaluating them. And if you're not using them, you're not using it because you know the benefits and the consequences, and you've decided that the consequences outweigh the benefit.
Yep. What about in the tier 3?
So a pretty creative tier 3 strategy. I'll give you an example of kind of a use case. So a client came to me, actually an EO member, and they were thinking about selling their business. They were a founder, one of 4 founders. They owned a significant minority stake, and they wanted to back away from the company. They still liked the company. They believed in the company. They liked their partners. They believed in their partners. They just wanted to, take their foot off the gas, and they felt like now is the right time in their life. And so we, through our help, it created a structure that they participated in, where the outcome of this structure was that they sold half of their interest in the business and they paid no capital gains tax. They retained half their interest in the business, and that income that they received through their K1 is not subject to tax. So now they're getting all their income tax free. All of the investments that they made with the sale proceeds are not subject to income tax, not subject to capital gains tax. And when we did this planning, we also incorporated their estate tax planning. So had they died last weekend or when they die in 50 years, none of the assets that they currently own, no matter how much they grow into, would be subject to estate tax. So pretty amazing structure. We refer to that one as our Wealth Preservation Trust, WPT. That was developed internally by our chief tax strategist, implemented exclusively on behalf of our clients and our co-inventors' clients.
Yeah, it's obviously you need a trained professional for these things because it's a lot of moving pieces. What would be another tier 2? And maybe we could talk about your book a little bit, Exit Rich Beyond Money, and because you talk about some of the stuff in there.
Well, I'll share another tier 2 strategy, which I find that we created also. And this came out of another EO member, actually, out of California. He was acquiring his father's interest in the company that they were in together. And originally, they were going to pay a significant amount of tax. And so we showed them how to restructure the transaction and pay no tax. They were very happy. In that interaction, one of the things I noticed was that they donated a lot of their product when it was, essentially stale inventory for them. And when you donate your own inventory, you get to deduct the cost of the inventory. But interestingly, if I were to buy your inventory and I held it for a year and I donated it to a nonprofit, I would get to deduct the fair market value. And many people know if you donate cash to an organization, you deduct the value of the cash receipt. Hopefully your listeners know, if instead of writing a check, if you give the charity of your choice stock, let's say you've got some Apple stock or some Tesla stock, you give them $10,000 worth of stock that you paid $1,000 for. Well, now you don't have to pay the capital gains tax on the difference between the $1,000 you paid and the $10,000 it's worth. So you save that money and you still get the $10,000 write-off for the value of the stock. Well, in our case, what we do is we buy seeds at 25% of their fair market value. So let's just say you make $1 million a year and the government will allow you to deduct $300,000 of this type of asset, 30% of your adjusted gross income. Well, I can sell you $300,000 worth of tomato seeds or melon seeds for 75 grand. And the reason you'd want to buy them for 75 grand to later donate them at 300,000 is that if you're in a no income tax state, you'll generate a 48% return on your investment. If you're in a high tax state like New York or California, you might generate like an 85% return on your investment. And not to mention, besides making money on this transaction, these seeds are actually going to get planted in the ground, grown into food, and feed hungry people. So we refer to that strategy as dual harvest. Our website's dualharvest.org because we see that you could do well while you're doing good.
So can people go to that site?
Yeah, people could go to that site, dualharvest.org. We could share information. Minimum income there for that transaction to make sense is around $600,000 or $700,000 for a single in a high income tax state, around $1 million for a couple in any state.
No, thanks for sharing that. People can check that out. What else do people find compelling with the book, Exit Rich Beyond Money? What else is in there that people should know about?
Yeah, I think the book's really the framework for the book is around the concept of not regretting your transaction. And the data is horrific. So 75% of people self-report regretting some component of their transaction. And typically, the regret does not come from the actual amount they sold the business. It's all those qualitative aspects of being prepared for the cocktail party where people start saying, "What are you doing?" and not having an answer. It's, the annual trade show is going on and people are posting the pictures and you're not there anymore. And, most entrepreneurs, if you look at the people you interact with most frequently and you had to categorize them, are they a deal friend or are they a real friend? Do I make money with them in some way or do I just socialize with them? A lot of our relationships fall into this deal bucket where we've got something going on in our friendship beyond pure social dynamics. And when we sell our business, that goes away too. Our status may change, our way of being changes, our time spent with our spouse changes, our free time changes. And so really the framework that we help entrepreneurs implement is one where they can let go of the branch that they're swinging on now and be like Tarzan to grab onto that next branch before they let go of their business and prepare themselves and test themselves while they still own their company with what life's going to look like when you no longer own it. And that's true as it comes to investing and how they're going to generate passive income and getting that experience before they sell. It comes to developing their calendar and asking, going back to those 4 questions of spending the time with the people you want and doing the things with the people you want and where you want, giving yourself that time freedom while you own the business, which, by the way, is going to make the business more valuable. And the third piece is, where are you going to derive your meaning and purpose if it's not coming from your business? So many of us are really tied to the value we get from employing people, from dealing with our customers, from solving problems. And interestingly, I was with the creator of Modern Elder Academy, and he was talking about agita, that we need agita in our life. And, when we're sitting around with nothing to do, we've got no agita, and that by itself is agitating.
I know, for you, you've sold companies, sold real estate transactions. I'm curious, and a lot of entrepreneurs, their wealth could be tied up in the business, right? And so I'm wondering some of the mistakes you see people make when they are selling, maybe from a tax perspective.
Sure. Well, there's lots of mistakes I see them making. If we just look at the tax side of it, the biggest mistake they make is not addressing what it is they want to do from a tax standpoint before they hire their investment banker. Once they hire that investment banker, it's all systems go, race to the finish line. Typical owner spending 1,500 hours in the process of getting their business ready to be sold and selling it. And so that becomes a second full-time job on top of the job they have as founder, visionary, CEO of their company. And so they don't have the space to learn something new like tax strategy, to deal with the advisors they trust, like their accountants and their lawyers, while there's not this pressure of closing a deal. And what often happens as a result is, if they don't develop their tax strategy before they hire their banker, they're only looking at tax strategy after they close, when the options available to them are much more limited.
What are some of those things that people should consider? Let's say, like, okay, in a year from now, I'm planning out. What are some things they should be thinking about?
I think it's all around whether or not you want to pay the tax and take absolutely no risk that the government's going to disagree with anything you've done, or if you're open-minded enough to look at the math and say, wait a minute, maybe I would do something even thinking that the government might disagree with me. And the reason I would open my mind to that possibility is only because I understand what the consequences are of a disagreement with the IRS. And those consequences are generally 3 things. One is, you've got to pay them the tax that you would have paid them if you'd done it the way they wanted you to do it in the first place. Well, that doesn't really cost you anything. The second thing is, they're going to charge you interest from the date that you should have paid them until the date that you actually paid them. And the IRS is a reasonable lender. They charge reasonable interest rates. Hopefully, it's an interest rate that you're out earning with the money that you're keeping and you're doing smart things with it. Generally, for our clients, we ask them to dedicate those tax savings to a special investment account. And that way we could see that money grow independently. And in the event the IRS comes back and asks for their money, we've got it sitting right there. The third thing, which is really the way that people get in the most trouble, is the penalty. And the penalties the IRS charge can be significant, but taxpayers don't know often that there is a insurance policy you could get or a way to prevent the IRS from charging you a penalty. And that's by getting a tax opinion letter from a qualified third party. So if you have this tax opinion letter, then your worst case scenario is you got to give them the money you would have given them to begin with, plus the interest for the amount of time you had that extra money. And more often than not, people aren't even asked to defend their position on their tax return. When you report $10 million or more of income on your tax return, you're audited 10% of the time. So that means 90% of the time, you're not being asked to defend your position.
Is there suggestions? I know for you, you really, it sounds like, took to real estate after you sold maybe it was before you sold the company. I'm curious what made you go into real estate and at what point in your journey?
So I started investing in real estate at the turn of the century. So 25 years in, started with a 2-family house that my wife and I lived in half and rented half. Cute little story. Back then, there was a 3% down loan that you could get, and you were able to generate a seller's credit. So I bought a new construction home from the developer, and I had him give me a $7,500 credit on my $225,000 house. And that credit reimbursed me for my down payment. So I didn't have to pay anything to get started in real estate. I used that equity in that house after a couple of years to go buy another 2-family house and another one and another one. And eventually, we've done a significant number of large transactions. And I've always liked real estate as an asset class because growing up in the accounting world, again, my father, my grandfather were accountants. My dad's wealthiest clients were real estate entrepreneurs. And in '86, when I was 10 years old, a bunch of them had a hard time. And I remember because I was always interested in money and business. So even at a young age, I was talking to my dad about what his clients were doing and how they were making money. And he enjoyed sharing those stories with me. And he always said, as long as you could survive the downturn and still pay your mortgage, as long as you could wait, you're going to be okay. And it was only the people that couldn't cover and service their debt that got hurt. And so I kind of took that lesson with me and decided originally my plan with my wife, who I had the good fortune of meeting when we were in college. The plan was we're going to acquire one multifamily property every year. We'll get 10 of them and we'll retire on, 10 rental payments, from multifamily houses. That was the original plan. The plan obviously evolved over time and became more sophisticated, but I thought it was a great plan. And it is a wonderful plan for many people. And so I would encourage anyone who's, again, before they sell their business, figure out what you like to invest in. Are you going to be a real estate investor? Well, there's a whole tax strategy associated with real estate investing. But if you're going to be an early stage venture investor, there's a different tax strategy for that. If you're going to go out and be an acquisition entrepreneur, well, there's a different tax strategy for that. So you really want to know how you want to invest your capital, because the structure in which you're going to invest your capital might design the tax strategy you're going to use before you sell your company.
Yeah, no, I want to talk about the evolution of your real estate investing a little bit. So like it started with the homes, but I know at one point you're like, I don't want to get calls about fixing stuff and I don't want to deal with this stuff. So what was the next phase of your real estate investing journey?
Yeah, and I'll share with you how I came to that conclusion through math, because I think it's a good entrepreneurial hack, which is to measure your return on time in addition to your return on investment. So anytime you're investing capital alongside effort, you want to measure both the return on investment and the return on your time. So you're advising that startup in exchange for 5% equity. Well, how much time are you investing and what's the return you're generating in as a result? And see, what's my hourly rate? And compare that to your hourly rate in your existing business. You're making $200,000 a year, working 2,000 hours in your company. That's $100 an hour. You're making $2 million a year. working 2,000 hours in your company, that's $1,000 an hour, right? So figure out your current hourly rate in your business. And as you're investing your capital outside of your business, make sure that your return on time is the same or greater. Don't sell your time for less for things that are outside of your core business. Because hopefully, if you're putting your time somewhere, it's your best time. It's all your zone of genius time. It's all the relationship capital that you've built. It's all the experiences that you've accumulated over dozens of years. It's absent of all the administrative, drama that you have to deal with as the CEO and visionary. So you should be generating a higher return on your time. Well, for me in my rental real estate business, I realized that if I paid myself what I was getting paid as an accountant for the time I was spending managing my properties, my return was negligible. I really wasn't making any money on my money. So I really was just trading my job. And the reality was my job as an accountant had a better future than my job as a landlord. So I repositioned and changed the way I was investing from being a direct operator of assets to investing in other operators. And so I would aggregate capital from friends and family. I'd say, hey, I'm going to put 50 grand in this deal, or I'm going to put 100 grand, or I'm going to put 200 grand, and come along with me, and we'll pool our money together and we'll put it together in this deal. And when we had success, I'd make money on everybody's money. And that became a fruitful business, kind of side hustle, if you will, and something I enjoyed a lot. It was fun to make money with friends, and something that I look forward to enjoying in the future as well.
So it's more kind of like a real estate syndicate.
Correct.
Yeah. And do you prefer, I'm curious, is it still more residential or commercial type of things that you're looking at?
The vast majority of my portfolio, I owned about $900 million worth of assets. The vast majority was multifamily housing, but still, $100 million worth of office space, $100 million of retail space. So not insignificant.
This is just an interesting concept because I was talking to someone who's in professional services, okay, doctor, and we went to a baseball card show, all right, and they were saying, and they're spending like whatever 45 minutes looking through this person's cards to save like $20, and afterwards we were discussing this return on time, and the person will be busy at the end of the day. They'll be tired and they may not see a couple patients because they just want to go home to the family, and maybe they're foregoing $1,000 or something. But I'm like, that would have taken you like 20 minutes, and then you spent 45 minutes looking through this stash of cards to save $20. Isn't that interesting? And there's like a perception there of, it's similar to what you're saying. Well, I'll save money. But are you actually saving money when you calculate your return on time? And
sometimes you have to distinguish from what's fun from what's profitable.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Right. And so there's often things that people do for fun. Like, I remember my mother-in-law complaining that I had someone hang up pictures in my house. Can't you hang up the pictures? Yeah, I can hang up the picture. I'd rather hang out with the kids, right? I don't. Let somebody else hang up the pictures and I'll play with the kids.
And some people geek out on that and they love doing fix-it stuff around the house.
Exactly. So, to each their own. I think if it's fun for you, then the measurement on money is irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't fun for me to do that, but I was watching that. Maybe it's fun for them. I love to talk about niche for a second. Okay. So it's interesting when you sold the family office business, and how you came to that specific niche. And, we always hear in a lot of the themes of the episodes, people at least start with a niche. Even from the founder of RX Bar, who ended up selling to Kellogg for $600 million, everyone knows RX Bar, they buy it. But really, they started with like CrossFit people as a niche. And talk about how you came to the divorced women as a niche for the family office.
Yeah, so when I joined my dad's accounting firm, it was 60% forensic accounting revenue, 40% traditional accounting revenue, doing about $2.5 million, $1.5 million forensic, $1 million traditional accounting. And at the time, we were one of probably the top 5 forensic accounting firms in New Jersey. I ultimately helped my father execute a strategy, a roll-up strategy. We acquired other forensic accountants, a lot of sole practitioners. We grew to become the largest forensic accounting firm in New Jersey. And I was part of our divorce practice. So I would testify in divorce court about how much money people made and how much their businesses were worth. And what I noticed was a few things. One is I didn't like the business because the more acrimony I created, the more money I made. And that was the wrong incentive structure because I was well known for resolving cases effectively. And whether I was a joint expert or an independent expert, my job, I felt, was to help this family find a resolution where they could both walk away equally unhappy. And
Exactly.
I did that very successfully.
Right.
And that was to the detriment of not only my accounting firm, but the lawyers that I worked with, because the lawyers bill by the hour also. So the faster I was resolving these cases, the unfortunate consequence was the people that had referred me the work would be able to bill less in fees. So I didn't really enjoy that aspect of it. But one of the things that I noticed was that the women predominantly who were receiving large sums of money from their hedge fund manager husbands, their entrepreneurial husbands, they were homemakers. They had left the financial responsibilities to their spouse, very traditional marriages in most cases. And now they were getting this large sum and they had no idea what to do and they didn't know who to trust. And so I saw an opportunity in the marketplace to leverage the relationships that I had with the divorce lawyers and say, listen, you know who I am as a person, high integrity, high trust, high competency. Let me serve these women and I will essentially be what was affectionately their replacement husband for their finances. I'd file their tax returns, I'd pay their bills, I'd help them figure out, how to lease the next car. I would help them with when their kids were getting married, how much to give them, or they're graduating college and what's the right thing, and invest their capital and manage the whole thing. And so that was a business I enjoyed very much. It put me on the same side of the table as these people that I cared about helping. I grew up with a single mom who had very little financial acumen. And from a young age, I was trying to teach her how to manage money effectively, unfortunately, never successfully. But it really led me to have compassion for people that were in this situation. And I'm an empathetic person by nature. So it really suited my characteristics and my strengths and the relationships that I had already built within the family law community as someone that could be trusted.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I think it's just an interesting winding path we take and that you took. Last question. Noah, first of all, thanks for sharing your expertise. As you saw, you could check out wealthrive.com to check out their resources and everything they have on there. Obviously, we talked about their book as well, which is probably on Amazon, any other place that you want to find it, Exit Rich Beyond Money. Last question is about some of your favorite resources. Those resources could be some of your favorite books. Obviously yours are your favorite, but in addition to your books, podcasts, or just people that you follow, that other people should check out.
So I've been part of EO for 13 years. I know you're part of EO as well. Entrepreneurs Organization. I would say that is the single best resource for my career to date. I've since joined YPO. I'm a YPO member now, 5 years. And again, another incredible organization filled with lots of people. I think when we talk about resources, for me, it goes back to the ability to network into a relationship. And whether that's an online virtual relationship or an in-person relationship or a relationship over the screen like we've created today. And what I've been able to learn over time is that relationship capital through the network of EO, or now YPO for me, has been incredibly valuable. I feel like if there's a problem in my life, I'm really only 1 or 2 or 3 phone calls away from finding somebody who's been there and solved the same problem. And so that's enabled me to really shortcut a solution to issues that I'm faced with. So if a listener is on this here and they do not feel like they've built out that network for them, I would encourage you to find it through a community that may be a community like EO or YPO. It may be a smaller community or one that's better aligned with where you are in life or where you are geographically or where you are in your industry.
No, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, your journey. Everyone check out wealthrive.com to learn more, and we'll see everyone next time. Noah, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast. This episode is powered by Rise 25. Please subscribe and check out future episodes.